Good afternoon, members of Parliament, support staff, radio listeners, TV viewers, and those following this meeting by various forms of media. Welcome to this meeting of the Committee of Justice number 2 of today, Wednesday, February 22nd, 2023. I would like to give a special welcome to the Honorable Minister of Justice, Ms. Anna Richardson, as well as her support staff. We've established a quorum of 9 members. Please stand for a moment of silence. Thank you. MP Bijlani had said something. Yes, I received notice of absence from MP Siddharth Bijlani. Are there any other notifications at this time? I see no need. We then go over to the agenda point for this meeting, which is update from the MOT on financial intelligence supervision in St. Martin. This is IS 984 of the 2021-2022 parliamentary year, dated June 7, 2022. And this meeting was requested by my person, MP Brison. Parliament received a letter from, June 7th. Parliament received a letter from MP R. Brison on June 7, 2022. This is IS 984, with the request that a meeting of this committee be convened to discuss the above-mentioned agenda point. The presence of the Meldpunt Ongebruikelijke Transacties, the MOT, Reporting Center for Unusual Transactions, was also requested. It's good to note that this meeting was called and had started on January 26, 2023, but was postponed due to technical difficulties. Hence today's meeting. At this time, as a request of this meeting, I would like to just briefly elucidate on the request for the meeting before I go over to the Minister of Justice. Minister, the reason that I've asked for this meeting, and I thank you for being here with the team from the MOT as well as sending the presentation, was really to get an update on something that we've done as a Committee of Justice a few times, to get an update from the MOT as to their practices, update on the number of unusual and suspicious transactions we get. But in particular, and I see in the presentation that was prepared, you have directly tackled some of the questions I had related to the banking sector, where there seems to be a trend, if I can call it that, where there is a disconnect between what the banking sector is saying regulators are forcing them to do and why they might have to take certain measures, and what the regulators, so for example, the MOT, the central bank, and so on, are actually saying. And I think in some of the questions I've seen answered, I think there will be some clarity to that today, so that is good. But in general, of course, it's also an opportunity for members of the Justice Committee to pose any additional questions related to the handling of the financial transactions in our country, and perhaps, Minister, tying into another issue that the Committee of Justice has been discussing, as a lot of the discussions related to CFATF are involving the MOT. If you can provide any update on that as well during this meeting, that would also be helpful. So with that elucidation, I will give the floor to the Minister of Justice for introductory remarks, and we see that there's a presentation. After that, we will go over to members of the committee. Minister, you have the floor.
Pleasant good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of Parliament, Secretary General of Parliament, Director of FIU, my support staff, those in Parliament, listening and viewing audience, a special good afternoon to all senior citizens. Mr. Chairman, along with the Director and staff from the Department of Financial Intelligence Unit of St. Martin, or the MOT, we are here today to provide updates in connection with the Financial Intelligence Supervision of St. Martin to the Justice Committee of Parliament in connection with your letter indeed that is listed as IS 984/2021 to 2022, dated June 7, 2022, as per your request, MP Brison. The Financial Intelligence Unit of St. Martin, also known as MOT, receives and analyzes unusual transaction reports and other information relevant to money laundering, terrorist financing, and associated predicate offenses, and supervises designated non-financial businesses and professions. In doing so, the FIU determines whether there is a suspicion of money laundering from terrorism financing. When that suspicion is confirmed, the suspicious transactions are forwarded to the Public Prosecutor's Office. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Sandra Kodabax. She is the section head of MOT and Supervision Department to begin the presentation, which will also provide the answers to the questions that you posed in your letter. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and Ms. Kodabax, you have the floor.
Good afternoon to everyone. My presentation is about the work of the Supervision Department of the Financial Intelligence Unit St. Maarten. I will start with the task of the Supervision Department. The supervisory authority of the FIU is based on Article 3, Paragraph 2 under A of the National Ordinance Financial Intelligence Unit. And this is in turn based on Recommendation 28 of the Financial Action Task Force. Recommendation 28 of the Financial Action Task Force stipulates that the DNFBPs should be subject to supervision to ensure compliance with the anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism requirements. The task of the Supervisions Department we supervise DNFBPs, we provide outreach to DNFBPs on AML-CFT legislation, and we assess DNFBPs on compliance with the aforementioned legislation. These are the various sectors of the DNFBPs that we supervise. So we have accountants, notary, lawyers, etc. Here we have the amounts of the various sectors. You will see that the jewelers we have at the moment registered 102, but this amount is will be lower because we are busy. We are currently busy with our administration, updating our administration. So so after the hurricane and after COVID, some were deactivated or they are inactive. So this amount will be lower. Activities of the Supervision Department. All the DNFBPs are required to register with the FIU, and regularly we update the information on, for example, when the IDs are expired, when the service providers have a new compliance officer. We regularly provide information sessions on a one-on-one basis at the office of the FIU. We send out risk assessment questionnaires, so we assess the DNFBPs, and we then establish how high their risks are. The risk can be high, low, low, medium, and high. The DNFBPs are required to provide us with their ultimate beneficial owner information. This information is very important. It is a requirement that adequate, accurate, and timely information on UBOs are available and can be obtained or accessed by the competent authorities. Supervisors are trained by experienced international regulators and supervisors, from member states of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. Last year, we had 2 employees who were requested by CFATF to participate as reviewers in the mutual evaluation process of Venezuela and Dominica. The main functions of a reviewer are to ensure that mutual evaluation reports are of an acceptable level and quality. Acceptable level of quality and consistency, to provide timely input on the scoping note and the draft mutual evaluation report and executive summary. Then we have our ongoing national risk assessment. We are currently busy with the national risk assessment of St. Maarten, as you may heard. In accordance with Article 18 of the National Ordinance Combating Money Laundering and Terrorism Financing, a national policy will be established to promote transparency, integrity, and public confidence in the governance and management of all nonprofit organizations, as well as a national policy to prevent or reduce money laundering and terrorism financing. The national policy is based on the result of the National Risk Assessment, which is an anonymized risk assessment of, among others, DNFBPs. So we are busy collecting data and information from all the DNFBPs. They have to be assessed. Then we are collecting information concerning all legal persons on St. Maarten. These information we request from the Chamber of Commerce, the Ministry of Theat, the Public Prosecutor's Office and Law Enforcement Agency, so KPSM. And we also will assess the MPOs, the nonprofit organizations. The financial unit assesses the risk, vulnerability, and threats of the DNFBP, so the private sector. The FIU is busy with the private sector. The Central Bank of Curaçao and St. Maarten assesses the risk, vulnerability, and threats of the financial institutions and the trust companies. The results of the NRA, so at the end, the results of the NRA are presented in a report that on the one hand will describe the money laundering, terrorism financing risk, vulnerability, threats, and on the other hand, the policy on how government mitigates aforementioned risks, vulnerability, and threats. The draft report, so the NRA draft report will be ready in the first quarter of 2024. Then we have the answers to the question of MP Brison. Question number 1. Are banks reporting institutions or policing institutions? So with other words, are they expected to report suspicious, unusual transactions, or are they expected to investigate deeply? The financial institutions, including banks, must report unusual transactions to the FIU. And the banks are service providers that fall under supervision of the Central Bank of Curaçao and St. Maarten. They are supervised by the Central Bank, and they're obligated to perform their customer due diligence, which can take an amount of time, so from 48 hours to a week, or maybe longer. Question number 2, can banks, when receiving such transaction, just report the transactions and know your customer information to the MOT? Or must they reject the deposit pending approval from MOT? So as mentioned before, the bank are obligated to perform their CDD and just report to the MOT. The bank can always reject a transaction on their own, so they don't have to wait on approval from the MOT. Question number 3, changes needed in MOT legislation to comply with FATF standards. The amendments to be made to the AML-CFT laws and regulations will be submitted in the second half of 2023. And the last question, an update on the number of unusual and suspicious financial transactions that have been recorded since 2017. Here you have an overview of the reported unusual transactions and the suspicious transactions. I guess this is due to the COVID. Yeah, that's the 2021, yes. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Kodabax, for that presentation. Is there any other additional speakers on your end for now? No? Ms. Kodabax, if I may, just a little point of clarity before we go over. If you can go back to the answer on the question number 3, I think, one more back. Can the answer, the legal obligation of the bank to perform, et cetera, you mentioned that the bank on their own can, based on their own commercial practices, choose not to reject. But is it, I think the essence of the question is, it is not that the bank can or should say, well, according to the MOT, I need to reject your transaction before I allow the deposit, because that's the main point of clarity between the business community and banking that's happening right now. That would help. Just what is the MOT rolling it? And I see Ms. Stella would like to reply. Just press the mic button. Yeah. Okay, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Chair, ladies and gentlemen. The bank cannot inform a client when they send any information to the MOT, because they have a tipping off, how you call it? They cannot tip off a client when they have correspondence with the MOT. So that can never happen.
Thank you very much for that clarity. And I see we have one member who would like to speak, and that is MP Ludmila De Weaver. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon again to my colleagues, to you, Minister Justice, and your support staff here. Mine was just a little simple one, because at the end of the presentation, it's just for clarification purposes, as we're looking at the slide that has the number of transactions, where it's split between unusual transactions and suspicious transactions, and you see the totals from the year of 2017 to 2021. If you can just briefly explain the difference of the unusual transactions and suspicious transactions, just for clarity, please. Thank you so much.
Okay, members of the committee, being that it's just one question, I will allow maybe a reply. Ms. Stella, you have the floor. One more. Yeah, got it.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
The unusual transactions are tied to a threshold amount. So there, it's just, for example, wire transfers of 500,000 and higher must be reported. So there's nothing wrong with the transaction. They are just reported so that we can see the flow of money coming and going into St. Maarten. The suspicious transactions are the transactions that were reported to the MOT, that were investigated by the MOT, and if there is a suspicion of money laundering or terrorism financing, then it's reported to the public prosecutor's office. So they are not reported, they can be reported, any transaction can be reported with a subjective indicator, but that doesn't mean that it's a suspicious transaction, because we have to investigate. And if there's nothing wrong, then that transaction is put aside. So nothing happens to it. And we can inform the bank or the accountant or the lawyer who reported it that we have, when we send it through to the public prosecutor's office, then we report to them in certain cases that we reported it to the public prosecutor's office. So suspicious is after investigation from the MOT.
Okay. So just maybe on that point, so in 2019, there were 2,554. We're saying that that's the number of transactions that were reported to the prosecutor as suspicious?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Follow up? Yes. Just Let me allow MP DeWeaver a follow-up, and then we go to the other speakers. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the answer. So then just maybe this is part of the dialogue that happens as we go further in, and I know that I don't want to assume because of when I'm looking at the dates that there's any influence, for instance, from global pandemics that would happen. But just out of curiosity, what would have happened in 2019 where it peaked and then all of a sudden it went down to like maybe ongeveer like I think maybe well, yeah, it went from 2554 to 90. So I just wanted to know what that big drastic fall was for. Is it is it more rigorous sort of controls or less transactions? I just want to know what happened in that time that it would have that big drop. Thank you so much.
The drop is mainly related that we can see to the pandemic with a drop in traffic of transactions. And if there were transactions that for whatever reason were not reported, then in our discussions with the reporters, they can still send us any transactions that they did not report.
Next, we have MP Melissa Gums. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to the Minister, to you, my referred colleagues, and those joining us. I just had two questions so far, and thank you for the presentation. Everything was pretty clear. But I just wanted to ask, what is the criteria for being placed under the supervisory department? So how does a particular industry or entity or person or so fall under that supervision? And the second question is, considering that lotteries do fall under the supervisory department of the FIU, could you share if additional steps have been or will be taken regarding the monitoring of lotteries? Because as we can see, there's an uptick in the placement of these so-called Bitcoin Cash ATM machines, and worldwide you have scenarios where cryptocurrency is used in money laundering scenarios. And since they have become quite visible so far at one particular lottery brand's establishments, I just would like some clarity on what the FIU is doing regarding that. And that's it for now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have two other speakers, so I'll continue with those speakers and then allow you time to prepare those answers. In the meantime, we go to MP Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to the Minister. Good afternoon to the representatives of the MOT. Thank you for the presentation. Mr. Chair, I only have one question. The National Risk Assessment, it sounds like quite a project to execute. And from my understanding, a national policy will be developed after the National Risk Assessment is done. So I would like some more information on the plan of approach for that risk assessment, just some more information and details on how it's going, because I think it's already happening. So just some more details on the National Risk Assessment. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have MP Westcott Williams. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, Minister and your support staff. Good afternoon to all tuned in to this meeting. Thank you for the introductory presentation on the issue at hand. I just have three questions, and my first one ties into the question by my colleague MP Melissa Gums, and it pertains to precisely whether the legal instruments that we have right now for supervision and control, whether, and if so, how, would they also deal with the cryptocurrency wave, and specifically what we're seeing here on St. Maarten? One of the items that is being touted by cryptocurrency markets, so to speak, is know your customer or your client. So know your customer or know your client requirement. That's being touted as an advantage of cryptocurrency. That know your customer would be in direct conflict with the know your customer and customer due diligence, etc., etc. So I would like to know how you look at this particular item in the context of the question regarding cryptocurrency. Then I want to, for my second question, I want to go to the matter of the CFATF. And the minister would recall that at early on in her term, maybe even right before this current minister's term, we were told, and I'm paraphrasing, that we were doing pretty good where our compliance was concerned. Just before that type of an announcement, we were told by the ministry at that time, in the presence of the Financial Intelligence Unit, that several things in our laws, several parts in our laws needed to be changed. I see that a review in the anti-money laundering laws, etc., I see that there's a review pending there. So very specifically, my question has to do with the fact that a couple of months ago, we received a rather stern letter from the ministry regarding Parliament's handling of the Penal Procedure Code. Was this just a general request by the ministry to finish that process, or did it have to do with anti-money laundering, etc., requirements that this Parliament need to finalize on the request of government, need to finalize its Penal Procedure Code? I also want to touch on the matter of lotteries as having been mentioned as one of the controlled or to be controlled sectors. And in the overview presented by the minister here this afternoon, lotteries in terms of the amount of lotteries are mentioned as 3. So I ask whether the MOT receives information, awaits information from the sector, and do not go out and control whether the information that you have on the books in terms of how many, whether you just sit and wait for that information to come to you. So the reporting to come and saying, I have a lottery business, this is what I have encountered, this is what I think is suspicious or not, etc., etc., etc. Because if I look around, unless you have many lotteries with different names, but basically under the same umbrella in terms of ownership, I would suspect, just from my view, and I'm not saying that's a comprehensive view of what happens there, but I would say that there would be more. So when you have a number like 3, did you sit down and say, well, if a 4th one come in to report, then we will have a 4th? Or do you go out and however you can gather information? So control the information that you have there in terms of numbers, if you get what I'm asking. And that would be it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Westcott Williams. And next, MP George Pantoflet, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to the Chair, my colleagues in Parliament, of course, Honourable Minister of Justice, and members of the Financial Intelligence Unit. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the presenter for the information. The public that is viewing or listening, I'm wondering in how much they understand exactly what is taking place here today, because you know, we're talking about the Financial Intelligence Unit, we're talking about the Financial Action Task Force, we're talking about the Caribbean Action Task Force, we're talking about recommendations and so on, and the issue of the companies listed on have to comply with recommendations. I believe Ms. Stella, through Mr. Chairman, mentioned the issue of $500,000 transaction from abroad to St. Maarten. And I do not know if she meant the issue of $500,000 to one account or from different persons coming into St. Maarten. So whether an organization sent $500,000 from abroad to St. Maarten or to people in St. Maarten, different persons, or was it one particular organization or whatever sending that one lump sum to one specific individual or to one specific company. Also, Mr. Chairman, the issue of the 40 recommendations, and how far have we complied with part or some of the recommendation, because it is said to be 40, and I know we are on what I see recommendation number 28. So this is number 28. Does that mean we have 12 more to comply with? Also, Mr. Chairman, the work that has been done by us in St. Maarten, the Financial Intelligence Unit, who pays for that? Who pays for that, Mr. Chairman? Because the fact is we have the, what you call Financial Action Task Force, or Financial or Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act, that was established by the US in 2003. And as far as I could do some research, it was actually to control the issue of drug trafficking, and then it changed afterwards to money laundering, and after 9/11 it changed to terrorism. These are things that started in the US, and from what I'm seeing here, Mr. Chairman, control is being done by them on us in the islands here. And I believe that if there's a financial consequence that has to do with protecting themselves or whatever they're doing, then it should be, they should also bear the cost, or let our Dutch Foreign Affairs individuals, Holland, take charge of that. Because it is not fair for us as a small island to have to pay for recommendations that they've stipulated that affects them more than us, Mr. Chairman. So that's why I want to know how far we have complied and what has been the financial consequence to St. Maarten to comply with these recommendations. Mention was also made as to the training of staff. Who pays for that? I heard 2 members from St. Maarten travel abroad to attend a training. Or who pays for that? Also, is it so that we have members of the IMF or the World Bank comes to St. Maarten and show that we are meeting the requirements, that we are following requirements? So again, is it so that we have members of the IMF coming down to St. Maarten and show that we are complying with these recommendations? Also, Mr. Chairman, I know we have heard the issues how casinos have suffered because of this. You know, where are they now? Where are the casinos now where that's concerned? Are they allowed to open bank accounts? Because I've spoken to persons who said that, you know, that right now, because of this, when it comes to paying them, now how are they paid? Paid in cash? How are they paid? Is it put in their account? How does it take place? How does this transaction occur? And Mr. Chairman, again, I'm saying it because I want the public to get an idea as to what it is St. Maarten is dealing with, in particular Minister of Justice and those of the Financial Intelligence Unit. It is no small matter. But at the same time, if we don't comply, we're going to be punished, financially and otherwise. So it's important that the public get a clear picture as to what we are facing. Also, Mr. Chairman, and this question is mostly for public consumption. If it cannot be answered, I'll be okay with this. Who determines when it's money laundering? Who determines when it's drug trafficking? Who determines when it's funds for terrorism? What is the criteria for that, Mr. Chairman? And again, the key thing is that it has with it, and if I'm wrong, I'll be corrected for sure, financial consequences. And I don't think that should be borne by St. Maarten. Some might say, yes, but you want to be country or whatever. No, the issue is those countries that are part of the G7 that have the issue, that want to control the global economy and want to make sure that they have all the loose ends tied up, where we find ourselves caught up in this quagmire and having to comply. So, Mr. Chairman, those are my questions for now. I know when, I have an idea when, or what is about, but that's another matter altogether. But I await the answers from the Financial Intelligence Unit and see exactly if I have any further questions to pose. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP George Pantoflet and members of the committee for your questions thus far. I also would have some additional questions I would like to pose, and actually one of the set of questions I would like to ask you, Minister, on behalf of MP Bijlani, who's unfortunately not able to make it because he's not well, but there are some important questions that I want to bring on his behalf as well. One of the questions was regarding pawn shops. We noticed that although pawn shops are registered as DNFDBs, am I using the right acronym? DNFDBs? BPs, there you go, DNF BPs. Despite them being registered, in the presentation, it shows 0. Can I get an explanation as to why that is? Because I do think there are pawn shops in St. Martin. Unless I'm mistaken, I drive around and I see the word pawn shop, but I don't know. I wonder why they would not be registered at the Mott. Another question is related to the KYC of customers above 25,000 guilders on credit card transactions. Why is this being insisted upon in terms of doing the client survey? What I mean by that is, apparently according to the regulation, a credit card transaction over 25,000 guilders requires that you do what's called a client survey, where you take a copy of their passport, their identification, they have to fill in a form, all of this type of information. But I wonder why that is necessary when that transaction is going through a local banking terminal, which then also is reported as an unusual transaction nonetheless. It can be a bit of a turnoff for some tourists when they come off board and they're asked, especially some of them are very sensitive about their identities and leaving a copy of a ID card that has their social security number. Especially American tourists are very wary about that in a country that they might not be familiar with. So I would like an explanation as to why that process is, and is there some flexibility to maybe adjust the process, being that credit card transactions perhaps should be considered in the lower risk end of transactions. I definitely agree with the regulation that cash transactions have to go through the client survey, but I'm asking specifically about credit card transactions. Has the ministry compared the regulations of the Mott in Aruba to that of St. Martin? Because it appears that they are a bit different and also a little bit less stringent, especially in the tourism economy, so the credit card transactions that I just mentioned. If the threshold is 500,000 guilders and there are 25,000 unusual transactions, are we to assume that if you multiply the number 500,000 times 25,000, is that the value of the total transactions that the Mott is basically being reported? I remember, let me ask it like this. I remember one time in the chart, you had provided like a total value, and it was quite alarming to members of parliament because it was like, what, 21 billion guilders? That's more than the GDP. Can we get an explanation? So once again, it may be good to get an explanation of how it works with the number of transactions and why it can be so much larger than the GDP of St. Martin. MP Bijlani did also ask Minister if he can send some additional questions to you in writing. Yes? For me, I would like to start definitely with the question regarding cryptocurrency. I think right now, the problem that the Mott and the country, St. Martin, the central bank, and everyone has is that there's absolutely an admittance of the CBCS. There is no regulatory framework in St. Martin for cryptocurrency. It is not even registered as a commodity in some countries. It falls under commodities. It's not registered as a security as it does in some countries. It's not even registered as a currency, so legal tender. I recall that there was a very informative session hosted by the World Bank together with the Mott in Maho, and I have to thank you for organizing that, and I was present. And one of the findings they found in kind of preparing financial intelligence units to start being able to kind of monitor crypto transactions is to then find a way to ensure that we identify it in legislation. So basically, if we can get cryptocurrencies, specific cryptocurrencies, registered as, be it, my personal preference would be as legal tender, so it is clear that whether you receive guilders, dollars, euros, or cryptocurrency in those amounts, you now fall under the MOT. Right now, if it has no status, no legality, then there's no way to say, then you kind of treat it like apples. If somebody trades 500,000 apples, do they report that to the MOT? Probably not. But when you give it a certain status and ensure that there are certain cryptocurrencies that have been vetted and stated, this needs to be reported at the MOT. I'm not sure if that's done via LBHAM or via, I still have to study that some more, but some sort of legal mechanism needs to be in place that we recognize cryptocurrencies and understand that they too need to be reported. So my question is just to confirm, in the current law, when I read the law on the MOT, it talks specifically about electronic legal tender transactions and cash transactions. So does cryptocurrency fall under that right now? I think I know the answer. It's a little rhetorical, but it's good for the record for members of parliament and the community know that unfortunately right now it does not. Also, regarding the banking, I think it was very good to get that answer, and like I illustrated a little earlier. We have the Bankers Association here sometimes, we have people that have a certain experience with a bank. Unfortunately, they are sometimes basically told that, yeah, but it's not us, it's the central bank, it's the MOT, I couldn't handle your transaction because I waited on the MOT and stuff like that. These are things that they are told, and this is why I encourage the Financial Intelligence Unit as well as our central bank to ensure that they make it clear what is our expectation of the banking sector, that they can't pass what is really, I think, correctly described as their own commercial choice to reject certain transactions, but then blame either the central bank or the MOT. Because it is clear that in most cases, it has nothing to do with the central bank or the MOT. It is their own commercial decision to do so. So I was very happy to get that answer as well. Regarding lotteries, Minister, I think I know one lottery company that has fully electronic made their entire system of issuing lottery tickets electronic. And with an electronic system like that, where there's no one that just writing pieces of paper and taking cash and all of this stuff and not registering it properly, could the MOT not integrate those sort of electronic systems that automatically are set? Because I know that one company, it's already being done in Curacao, the electronic system is set to automatically issue, that is, if there's a winning of more than 25,000 guilders, it sends it automatically so that Curacao, their MOT knows, etc. Is that something that we can maybe implement across all lotteries and ensure that the one that has that electronic system in place can easily do all the reporting, and any questions as to whether there's a willingness or not to do so, you can audit the technical systems for yourself and see that it is indeed functioning in that manner. Regarding, and now regarding the CFATF and this situation, I think I want to give a little background as to why we're here. When the Criminal Procedure Code first came to this parliament, it was touted as something that was absolutely necessary immediately as possible because we're going to get blacklisted, etc., etc. And when I read through the document and I took the CFATF recommendations and I take the Criminal Procedure Code, I said, I can see where this article makes sense. But there were a few things that jumped out at me from that law that I saw, but what does this have to do with CFATF recommendations, such as a crown witness status? Nowhere in the recommendations does it specify specifically you need that. The hacking of computers, that was also something that was not specified, but it was insisted upon that it had to be there. And I will say clearly that I did not find it a coincidence that at the time when that law was being brought to Parliament, we had a member of Parliament that was suspended and facing an investigation, and meanwhile, the government is saying, hurry up and pass this law. That raised some suspicions to me, because I don't believe that what was being used to try to prosecute this individual was codified, and if you read the Memorial van Toelichting of the Law, everywhere it says we need to codify, codify, codify. So I want to be realistic about why we decided as a parliament and then via a committee of justice to say, hold on, we are going to review this because we do not believe that the intentions of where that law came from were pure. That was the overall sentiment of many members of parliament at that time, which is why the handling of that law was suspended, and since then it's being handled by the Committee of Justice. Now, Minister, you did send a letter to Parliament, and to be honest with you, I understand the letter. Because yes, the Committee of Justice said, hold on, government, we are going to do what we can and analyze this and present an alternative, but I do agree that it has taken too long. What I can update the Minister on is that we are now at that final stage. I believe Parliament has received, if I can look, a final draft that has been vetted by members of the Justice Committee. We'll allow them one more opportunity to look through it. The Minister can look forward to receiving that soon. So at the time when that letter was written, personally, I, MP Brison, understood because it was taking very long. But on the bright side, we are now at the point where soon we'll be able to provide you, well, these are the articles that we think from a Parliament perspective are more palatable without including things that were built to target politicians. Just calling a spade like how it is. Because that is wrong and that is not what the role of Parliament is. Should not be used to try to find ways to codify things that do not exist in our legal system to try to punish us and punish others out there. And there needs to be balance within the legal system. Because what we have seen, and based on the analysis that was being done, the legal system balance was being shifted on the side of prosecution. And based on the analysis we received, we saw certain elements when you compare to the rest of the kingdom that it was clear that certain rights that others have in other parts of the kingdom were not being afforded to some of our own within St. Maarten. And what we are doing, I believe, is bring a bit more balance to both sides, being able to be provided an interpreter, being able to have full access to your case file, being able to be heard in front of 3 judges instead of 1 in certain cases. This is about the fairness of the legal system, not to tilt it over one side or the other. And I think, Minister, when you receive that and your team reviews it, hopefully you will agree that that is something more palatable. So with that, members of the committee, I go over, we have one more question from MP, or maybe a few more for MP George Pantoflet.
No, thank you. Just one. And I'm glad how you explained that concerning the penal code. Now, in a very simple question, Mr. Chairman, through you, what is the difference between the FACTA and the CFATF? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So yes, just to maybe elaborate more, we have the CFATF, and the FATCA is the Foreign Account Transaction Act. I forgot the name of it, but that one is from America. That's the one that's implemented by America. So I think what I'll do is adjourn for a couple minutes to discuss with the minister the way forward for the answering of the questions, and I'll adjourn for 3 minutes. Meeting adjourned. Alvin? Good afternoon to the members of parliament and the public viewing. We will need some additional time to allow the minister and the MOT to prepare some more of the answers. So they requested an additional 20 minutes. So let's be back at 3:50. Yes, 10 to 4 p.m. we'll return. That's okay? Okay. Meeting adjourned. We're starting. Good afternoon, once again, members of the Committee of Justice and those viewing. We have had as agenda point today the update from the MOT on financial intelligence supervision in St. Maarten. We received a presentation from the Minister of Justice as well as the Financial Intelligence Unit, after which various members of Parliament posed questions and comments. We asked an adjournment to allow the answers to be prepared, and the answers are now ready to be shared with the members of the committee. We'll first have Ms. Ligia Steller answering some of the questions, after which the Minister of Justice will also answer one of the questions. So for now, we go to Ms. Ligia Steller. If you can press the mic. Okay, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The first question that I have is the one for MP De Wever. I think I had answered that one. The next one that I have is from MP Gums. What is the criteria for being placed under the supervision department? This article is number 2, paragraph 1 under B in the National Ordinance Combating Money Laundering and Terrorism Financing. And the service provider must be a non-financial business or a legal profession. So that is, for example, a lawyer or a jeweler or anything that is not a financial related service provider. So a bank, for example, does not fall under our supervision. The only non-financial service provider that falls under the supervision of the central bank is the trust company. And your next question, MP Combs, is considering that lotteries fall under our supervision. Can you share if additional information will be provided where lotteries are concerned? We are busy now with the registration of the lotteries. We are doing this in consultation with the Ministry of TEA to get an overview of which lotteries all have a license and are operational, and also to inform them, hold info sessions with them. It has been a bit of a challenge, but we do that together with the Ministry of TEA because they also have supervision on those service providers that are lotteries and casinos. But as I am informed that they are busy setting up an authority, so they will take over a more stringent supervision of these entities. The next question I have is from MP Duncan. The National Risk Assessment, if we could give more info on the plan of approach for the National Risk Assessment. The National Risk Assessment is an ongoing assessment now. We started June last year, and it concerns basically the gathering of information, data, on the risks and vulnerabilities of money laundering and terrorism financing in St. Maarten. The FATF considers it as something that a jurisdiction must know. What are our risks so that you can combat those risks of your financial system. Usually it's an exercise that takes 2 years. It's not easy. This is our first national risk assessment, and we are getting now good cooperation of the private sector and the public sector. It's also the third stakeholder in that is the law enforcement agencies, the police, the public prosecutor's office, who have to give data. So maybe in the first assessment, it will be a bit of a challenge, but after you've gone through that, you try to paint a picture that shows that the jurisdiction is aware of what this entails, the combating of money laundering. The private sector is also cooperating through anonymized questionnaires where the results, after we have evaluated the data, we document it, submit the results to the Council of Ministers and Parliament, and also at the same time draft a policy that will, if you have deficiencies, that will mitigate those deficiencies. The CFATF will also look at the results of a national risk assessment to see where the country is at. The questions of MP Westcott. The first one is the legal instruments we have right now for supervision and control, how we will deal with the cryptocurrency wave in St. Maarten. This is considered a financial service that falls within the sphere of the central bank. That has to be regulated. It's not regulated at this moment. So there is draft law being made by the central bank. So I would leave this to their, I have seen draft laws that they made, and I leave it to them to be the one that is pulling this project. But we are looking into it. And as soon as they have new regulation to submit to Parliament, before that we will look into it again. The know your customer, if it is in direct conflict with, how is it looked at in regards to cryptocurrency? I refer to the answer that I gave before. The CFATF, concerning this, we were doing good. We were doing good where our compliance was concerned. A couple of months ago, we received a letter concerning the penal code. Was this a general request by letter, or does it have to do with the CFATF, the minister? Chair.
Sorry, can you repeat?
No, she read the third question from
Okay.
MP. Yeah. Thank you very much.
MP, Minister of Justice, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to chime in here to speak about the letter that MP Westcott made reference to, because her question is, was this a general inquiry, or is it a case that it is in connection with the CFATF? And I just wanted to refer back to the specific letter where it is, where I specify the reason for asking for it. So this letter I did send in May of 2018 to the then chair. With regards to expressing my concern is one of the things that I made mention about the process, because it was a case of since 2020, in March of 2020, it was requested by Parliament to be able to do this review. And I also use the term passive approach by Parliament because it was a case that, you know, we had continuously been coming to Parliament to answer questions about other platforms, but this in particular that bears such a great impact on our community. I said the new draft criminal procedure code provides, for example, more rights for victims and more safeguards in applying investigative tools. Moreover, this impasse of over 2 years in this legislative process of such a fundamental national ordinance in the rule of law endangers the standard of providing legal security for the members of our community. And that is my responsibility as Minister of Justice. So I submitted this letter to be able to get a status on where this item was, because it had been 2 years ongoing. In addition to that, I indicated in a letter that the principle of concordance of the legislation applies to the draft criminal procedure code. We are now in a situation where Aruba had already approved the legislation, and because this is a uniform legislation, the fact that St. Maarten was still pending for so long gave me reason to be able to put this in writing. But what I will say, and I hope that even in the content of my letter, it answers MP Westcott's question as to whether it was general or linked to CFETF, because my letter made no mention of the CFETF, but just me seeking to get an update as Minister of Justice. But what I would say is today, MP Brison, I have to express my appreciation to you on behalf of the Justice Chain and the community of St. Maarten, who is waiting for this draft penal procedure code to be handled, because today is the only day that I've really gotten a clear indication with content as to what we can expect, and that it's, in the way coming to the minister within short. So I just wanted to express appreciation there and then reiterate what I mentioned in the letter. I'd like to, to turn it back over so she can finish. Yes, thank you so much.
So, Ms. Stella, you have some other questions to answer still? Okay, you press. Okay, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And the next question is on the lotteries from MP Westcott Williams. The lotteries as one of the controlled sectors. Lotteries are mentioned as 3. Does the MOD await information from the sector and does not go out and control whether the information on the books? Or do you just sit for that information to come to you? Do you go out and gather information or control the information? The response that we can give is that the registration of the lotteries is an ongoing process. We supervise on money laundering and terrorism financing, and we are busy now with the registration and to get better information to know which companies have a license. We check the information with the Ministry of TEAD, and they also do their part of the supervision on these license holders. So it's a two-pronged approach. When we have them registered, we see to it that their information is up to date. And we go out also when we have the resources to do that, to see if there are any new lotteries on the block, so to speak. But once they are registered, they get info sessions, and when we are ready to do the assessments, the audits, then we either go by them or we can do an off-site audit of all the service providers once we have enough capacity to do that, the resources. The next set of questions are from MP George Pantoflet. The first question is on whether it's an organization sending money to a company or an individual. The example I used concerns a wire transfer of 500,000 guilders or higher to St. Maarten or from St. Maarten. In general, a transaction can consist of one transaction or a set of transactions that we investigate. But the example that I gave concerned one transaction that must be reported as an objective transaction. The 40 recommendations, how far have we complied with some of these recommendations? Does that mean we have 12 more to comply with, since we refer to number 28? Recommendation number 28 concerns supervision of DNFBPs. That's why we refer to that one. In general, we have to comply with the 40 recommendations. We included all those recommendations in our national law, combating money laundering and terrorism financing. And the recommendations are not static, they are dynamic. So if there are if we notice that there are, for example, with the pawn shops, if we see that they do not provide services that comply with the, for example, the 25,000 guilder threshold, then we delete them from the law. Then they don't need to be supervised anymore, except if they provide services that can be considered high-end jewelry, for example, that meet the criterion of 25,000 guilders or higher. So that's when we, every more or less 10 years, or in between, we amend our laws to comply with the 40 recommendations. So that number 28 was meant to indicate under which recommendation the supervision falls. The recommendations are related to the immediate outcomes. There are 11 immediate outcomes, and those are connected to groups of recommendations that, in which a jurisdiction shows that they are busy combating money laundering and terrorism financing. But in August of this year, info sessions will be given by the CFATF where they go more in depth, on what the evaluation next year will entail. So then you can go more in depth with them on all these criteria. Who pays for the FIU operations or the recommendations? The government of St. Maarten pays for the resources that are necessary for the FIU to carry out its tasks. What has been the financial consequence to comply with these recommendations? For example, hiring of staff, renewal of the registers of the FIU, travel costs related to attendance of plenary meetings of the CFATF and the Egmont Group of FIUs, and other material costs. The training of staff, the specialistic training is offered free by all these international organizations, mainly the FATF and the Egmont Group of FIUs. Other related costs are paid for by government. Is it so that we have members of the IMF and World Bank to ensure we are meeting the requirements? Yes, the IMF visits St. Maarten on a regular basis in light of its macro fiscal staff meetings, and is updated by the FIU on the progress in carrying out its supervisory tasks. The OECD, for example, also monitors the supervisory tasks carried out by the FIU. Where are the casinos where this is concerned? Are they allowed to open bank accounts? This is dependent upon the casinos meeting the bank's KYC requirements. How does their transactions occur? When the transactions, I think if they don't have a bank account, most probably their transactions are done in cash. Who determines money laundering, drug trafficking, and financial terrorism, financing of terrorism? Who determines the criteria when, if it's a case of money laundering or drug trafficking, etc.? The public prosecutor must investigate the case, and based on the results thereof, the prosecutor decides to prosecute, saying if it's money laundering, drug trafficking, etc. Those are the predicate offenses to money laundering. The questions of MP Brison regarding questions of MP Bishlani. Regarding pawn shops, although they are registered as DNFBPs, in the presentation it shows 0. Why is that? The service, as I said earlier, the services provided by pawn shops have been and are being evaluated. And if these are related, for example, to high-end jewelry, then they are registered. They were included in the laws, but if they do not offer, in this case, high-end jewelry, then they will be taken out of the law, the anti-money laundering law. If they offer high-end jewelry, then they will be considered a jewelry store. Related to the KYC of customers above 25,000 guilders, related to credit card transactions. Why is it necessary that the transaction is going through local banking terminals? Is there flexibility to consider this? This issue has been discussed with the Indian Merchants Associations, who brought it forward to the FIU, and it was decided to follow the FATF guidelines and have the jewelers report the 25,000 guilders or above cash transactions. This will be amended in the anti-money laundering laws. Has the ministry compared the regulations of the MOD to that of Aruba, as they are different and less stringent in the tourism sector? I refer to my response on the question 2 of MP Brison. The next question, if the threshold is 25,000 guilders, and there's 20, okay. Please explain on the number of transactions and how this can be larger than St. Maarten's GDP. In the past, there was a value added to the amount of transactions, which gave an incorrect impression that the amount was larger than the GDP of St. Maarten. It can occur that, for example, 3 service providers report the same transaction. I refer here, for example, to the sale of a house. The transaction is then reported by the realtor, the notary, and the bank. And that gives a very high amount. So we stop putting a value to the transaction. The next question of MP Brison, there is no regulatory framework for cryptocurrency. It's not regulated. In the current law, it speaks of electronic legal transactions and cash transactions. Does cryptocurrency fall under that right now? No, it's not regulated, and consequently, it's not being reported. A bank, if they report a transaction that is related to the purchase of cryptocurrency, then that is a normal transaction that is reported by the bank, and it's not specifically on the cryptocurrency. The next question is regarding lotteries. Their integrated system, if that could not be connected so that the MOD can receive an automatic alert on big financial winnings. As we are in the process of registering them, we will look into this matter. Regarding the CFATF, MP Pantoflet asked what is the difference between the FATCA and the CFATF. The FATCA is the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, and that is for US citizens, and that is different from the CFATF. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does the Minister of Justice require any further? No? Okay. Before going back over to the floor, just also want to give a few updates from the Committee of Justice. So, like I had summarized earlier, in 2021, we received an analysis where we had hired a third-party law firm to analyze that, and it was also discussed in August in 2021, so the minister knows and the public as well. We also did bring this forward on a tripartite level, so that indeed, considering the legal system, we are discussing it on that level as well. As a matter of fact, in the upcoming tripartite in a few weeks, we will also be having a discussion with it then. At the time, the committee, that's actually next week, not in a few weeks, the committee decided which articles they felt needed to be dealt with. So we got a full analysis and we looked at, okay, what are the ones, especially CF-ATF related, what are maybe too stringent, our kind of view as a committee on it. Just so that you also are aware, Minister, a letter was drafted to update you on our last committee meeting regarding what I kind of verbalized earlier. This was done in collaboration with the committee, so we did decide on the wording to ensure that you get a full update on where we are with this legislation so that you can then look at it and get the sentiments of Parliament regarding what should be included in changes to the Penal Procedure Code. Like I mentioned earlier, the Penal Procedure Code is also on the agenda for the upcoming tripartite, which will take place next Monday. As you mentioned, Aruba did pass it, but Curaçao and St. Maarten not as yet. And from what I understand, Aruba did not ratify it, though. So it did pass the Parliament, but yes. So you understand that Curaçao and St. Maarten, it needs to be done on that level. But I think we will get some more information on, let's say, at least on a parliamentary stance once we present our findings from the Justice Committee. I see MP Westcott Williams would like the floor. You have the floor.
Thank you, sir. The Minister, thank you for your interaction, and I think I understood you correctly, but I just wanted to confirm it. Before today, you were unaware of the process regarding the Criminal Procedure Code that was initiated here in Parliament some time ago already, what we call the review. You were unaware of that process up until today. That's what I got from you, and I would just like that to be confirmed if that's indeed, if I understood you correctly, that today is really the first time you've understood what we have been doing where this matter is concerned. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Minister, in advance. Thank you.
MP George, so I'll give him the floor, and then we can come back to you, Minister.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for the answer provided. The question which I had to pose instead of saying FACTA was actually the guidelines from the FATF in contradiction of those of the CFATF. But because what I realize is that the FATF guidelines, let me use this term, and I can be corrected by the experts, are higher than that of the CFATF. Am I correct where that's concerned? In other words, the CFATF has to follow the guidelines of the FATF. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP George Pantaflet. Minister Richardson, you have the floor.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to MP Westcott. No, I was not indicating that I was not aware of the process. If we listen to what MP or the chairman even stated, he said that indeed it had taken time before I was receiving, or we were receiving, a response after this thorough process was being done, and that a letter is being drafted to be sent to my person to be able to give me that explanation as to the status and the findings. And so my position is it was taking a long time before I was receiving what is now coming to me. So it's not that I wasn't aware that the Justice Committee was busy with a review. It's just that the information was taking long to arrive to us as to where we are with the review. And this is still forthcoming.
And we are confirming the letter was signed on behalf of my person from the committee and I think maybe the chair. So if it's not with you already, it should be with you very soon. Are there any others who wish to speak at this time? I just have one more thing I wanted to add, and that's why I was looking. Oh, yes. I think she's maybe looking on that point, the difference between the CFATF and the FATF. Are you ready to answer that? Yes? Ms. Stella, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The CFATF is a FATF-style regional body. So the FATF has its headquarters in Paris, and each region, Asia, Latin America, Caribbean, Europe falls under the FATF, but all the others follow strictly the guidelines of the FATF, but they are partitioned per region. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, great. I would just want to add one other point that was mentioned earlier related to cryptocurrency, and this is one of the challenges from when I entered Parliament. I was consistently in 2018 asking the question and trying to get a position from the central bank as to where they stand regarding cryptocurrency. And on May the 7th, 2018, we had an official announcement from the central bank which read that after consulting the existing laws and regulation, we must inform that the bank does not have the powers or authority to exercise supervision or oversight over the above-mentioned institutions, so that's electronic money institution, payment institution, cryptocurrency exchange, etc., nor can the bank prohibit the conduct of the above-mentioned businesses. And like I said, this is not an ideal situation because it is completely unregulated, and although I am very pro-cryptocurrency, I have no problem, and as a matter of fact, I welcome regulation. Some people might think that you have to, because you're pro-cryptocurrency and you believe in blockchain and you think that there's benefits, that means you just want a completely unregulated world. No, that would be highly irresponsible of me. The minute I spoke of cryptocurrency in this parliament, I spoke of the need for regulation. And in looking at what other countries within the rest of the Caribbean, and in particular the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, they are moving towards creating legal tender status for cryptocurrency, because once they have legal tender status, they then fall under your civil code, they fall under the supervision of the MOT, they fall under the supervision of your Securities Commission, etc., etc. So I'm currently analyzing that. I did get to see the Payment Systems Act in a work visit to the central bank at one point. And one of the challenges they had is that it was a very, very broad act that talked about crypto mining and exchanges and so on. And the problem with creating such a broad act that, let's say, you kind of copy from a large country is that then will you implement all of those different institutions as well? Because then you need a mining oversight institution, you need a exchange institution, you need a securities commission, you need all of that if they were to implement the Payment Systems Act that they had. So in my opinion, the best safeguard that the country should look at is establishing legal tenders for cryptocurrency so that it is clear. If you receive or transact in this, you should treat it the same way you treat money. You have a responsibility to report it, you have a responsibility to act within the law with anything related to cryptocurrency. And so that's just wanted to kind of reiterate my position so that it is clear. I would like to thank the Minister for your presentation, as well as Ms. Stella and the rest of the team. Thank you all so much for the information provided. I think it is good. I think it's becoming kind of an annual thing where the MOT comes in and gives us some great elucidations on financial supervision in our country. With that, members of Parliament, I would hereby close this meeting and thank all for your attention. Meeting closed.